Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. It's good to see so many people in the audience. I want to get started by just asking you a question and getting you to kind of give me a response. So my question is this: what has inspired you into gaming? Just one word, what inspires you about gaming? Fun? Yeah. Oh no, yeah, just shout out. We can handle shouting out.
Creativity.
Creativity. Cool. Fun, creativity.
Beauty.
Beauty.
Immersion.
Emotion.
Immersion.
Immersion. And cool.
Escape.
Escape.
Unpredictability.
Good one. Versatility. Nice. Yeah, just shout out.
Challenge.
Challenge.
Adventure. Adventure.
Adventure.
Play.
Play.
Awesome.
That's pretty good. I was really curious just to hear what would come out of a question like that at GDC, so thank you so much. I'm Jonas. I'm a researcher at Runaway, and what inspires me is connecting people with the natural world and bringing meaning into their life, which is really good because at Runaway we are games inspired by nature, and that's kind of my jam. My goals today are to tell you how research helps us with our designs, but more importantly, to try and give you tips that I've learned along the way that can help with your artwork and your designs as well. To do that, I want to give us a quick little definition of what I'm talking about when I'm saying research. And in this case, it's a process of finding connections between the real world and your content. The goal is that you gain inspiration, add depth, and create points of engagement in your artwork or in your game. You can think of this kind of like another tool for finding your differentiator. It's a thing that helps you set yourself apart from the other games out on the market and connect with your audience. A really good example, I think, is Shadow Tactics, which took some initial game inspiration from earlier things like Commandos, but reinvented itself through researching feudal Japan, which gave it a new look and new themes into its game. And that's kind of what we're talking about, it's ways of standing apart. And so on that note, I'm just going to move right into inspiration and how you can get inspiration from your research. So research as a tool for inspiring designs is probably pretty familiar to most of you. It probably already turns up in your art boards, and your mood boards, and your concepts. I do want to focus just a little bit and challenge you to think about what you could do to take those things that you're doing and make it your differentiator. It's something that we focused on at Runaway, with each of our games taking inspiration from a different source. Flutter is a collection game featuring beautiful butterflies that are all based on real-world species. Starlight is similar, but it has moths, and we've added some more kind of supernatural and mystical elements from the real world, things like moon cycles, mythology. You'll see cultures and superstitions appearing in Starlight. And finally, Splash contains nurturing elements and features sea creatures from the coral reef. Each one slightly different, but in each case, the research has worked its way into the designs through the art pipeline, which in our case starts in the pre-production phase, where we gain research from the natural world and then take it through the concepts and the artwork. That gets refined in production before coming out and being added to the actual game. So that's basically how it's working for us, with a few examples that you can kind of see this process going through Starlight. What I want to do is also give you tips at each one of these points, so that hopefully you get something you can take away. So my first tip is to start early to give yourself time to be inspired. Whether you're an artist or working with artists, it's important the research starts before your concept phase. And that's true whether you're coming up with a new creature, new environment, new character, or even like a whole new game, like what we're setting up sometimes. At this point, it's really not about narrowing what you're finding, but getting the surprises out of it. And those surprises I mentioned kind of lead into that differentiating concept. Personally, I start by recording anything in Pinterest boards. So if something catches my attention, I just throw it into a Pinterest board so I have a link back to it later on. Padlet is another really good free resource for this. And again, the concept is just to let yourself be inspired by the research that you're finding Put it in one place and come back to it later. Don't worry about narrowing it down. My second tip is to search many sources. And it's really tempting to just rely on like Google searches or other games to pull in ideas from your concept. And I really can't overstress how useful books actually are for me. And my case for books is basically that they're already organized. They contain relevant themes and artwork to whatever you're working on. And they can also give you the keywords to help you make better internet searches. It's not an exclusive thing. This is just something that I found incredibly useful, particularly if you walk into the kids section. The kids section is filled with books that have already been parsed down into very understandable content that most people can relate to. The third tip that I've got for you on inspiration is just to let your content lead you. If you're artists, you're used to getting ideas from different places. The point with using research to get the inspiration is to add this as another way of finding that content, finding that inspiration. To do this, I recommend really stepping back and trying not to worry about how you're going to make it work, which is really hard to do if you're in the games industry, right? You always are kind of thinking about how it's going to work. But I do think it's really important if you want that inspiration that you do take that out and let your team help you with that later on. If something piques your interest, or even just seems to keep coming up in your research, note it down. Don't worry about how you're going to make it work. Just kind of record it as a potential theme that you can use later. This can really help your artwork later on, because these can come back to be the things that separate it. Just to give you an example of these tips, I just want to walk through a Starlight event that we had recently. If you're not familiar with mobile events, basically ours work by, we create 5 mods, we release them into the game for a limited amount of time, and players just have a short period to collect those things. In this case, we have recently localized to China, and we're preparing an event for Chinese Valentine's Day. To give you an idea of how early it was starting, the event was in August, and I started up in May. So about a 3-month lead on that. And I basically started by looking into the real world holiday and mods from Asia. I was hoping to pull stuff in that matched the colors of the holiday as well as real solutions that can be found in it. What I wasn't expecting to find in the research was a connection to the mythology itself. The Chinese Valentine's Day basically is centered around 2 characters who fall in love, love's forbidden, they end up being separated and are brought back together up in the sky as stars that you can actually see in the nighttime, which was really cool and gave us a lot of room for inspiration. It's something that I brought into the team meetings to try and get everyone into, and it worked out pretty well. Our end result was that the mods were from Asia. The stars and the galaxy were added into the background so that players could get that recognition from it. We even managed to tell the story through our own assets and social media. For me, the best part was that our fans had a really big response to it. They got into it. From a more marketing standpoint, we also ended up getting a feature with the App Store in China, which was pretty nice as well. Just before we carry on to depth, put your hand up if you can recognize the game that each one of these real-world creatures was used in. This time that looks pretty good. So for those of you who are familiar, I really love that. It's just great. It just works its way right into things. Sometimes we don't even know it. And on that note, let's jump into depth. So if you start early and let your content lead, you'll probably have a lot of interesting possibilities to bring depth into your project. The key now is to return to that foundation, organize, and decide what parts you can consistently and deliberately put into your design. It's as much about what you leave out as it is about what you put in. And this is also a point where I feel artists have a lot of power in the design because you're bringing things together automatically. And if you're pulling your inspirations from research, you're able to carry that through across your whole team and across your artwork, which I think is really powerful. So my first tip here is basically to go back to the source of your inspiration. And from there, explore the themes already present in the research, while also considering their implications with the themes, narratives, and mechanics of your entire design. This is the point when you start to decide which of those things you found is useful and can be added consistently. In the Starlight example I was mentioning earlier, I started off exploring things around like the moth names, the festival colors, scientific classifications, before eventually resting on a region and cultural mythology theme to pull it all together. In your games, you might also consider things like cultures, habitats, technologies, and history. And Skyrim is a really good example of this, where each of the real world, or each of the cultures in the game, have a real world inspiration that comes out of it. So in this example, I just was showing a simple Roman armor and how it inspired some of the imperial armor and the imperial culture in that game. You'll see this all over the place. My point is that the themes do exist in the real world that you can pull out of it. And that when you do pull those out, your goal is to basically form them into takeaways that you can put consistently in your artwork or design. For my case, I do this just by setting out small goals, write them up into pitches or guidelines that I can share with the rest of the team just for consistency's sake. And it not only helps me to find relatable elements, but also to keep the team consistent throughout the collection. For example, I might have something like the species will be recognizable next to their real-world counterpart, or in-game journals will reinforce elements both within the game as well as real-world elements. In your projects, you might do something more like Skyrim, where you're taking cultures and using that to inspire artifacts and architecture. You might think of mythological creatures and their connections to the real-world origin myths. In a sci-fi setting, you may want to create like a creature behavior in your sci-fi world that involves something more than just like attack and flee. Maybe you want to encourage something that's a nurture to create a slightly new behavior base for your creatures to live in. Just a few examples of how you can create some takeaways and pull that into your design. The goal of all of this is to apply your takeaways consistently. Because consistency is, or because it's the relatability of your research and the consistency in execution that will help you build trust with your audience and really bring the depth out in your art or designs. So for another example, I'm going to take us into Splash. We started this knowing that Splash wouldn't be as relatable as butterflies. And so in the early concept phase, I went back to just my resource and rediscovered something that I'm really happy to share with you. Fish are really smart. No, you might not believe me. Fish are really smart. We have some that are working together up at the top, work together to hunt in the coral reefs. We have some that make life pair bonds. And I love this little pufferfish down here. They're incredibly curious and really good at problem solving. So this was a theme that I latched onto in my research, is that fish have this intelligence. It was something that the artists also were really excited by. And we turned it into a takeaway that we could pitch to the rest of the team. When we did this, the end result showed off that fish have expressions as well as behaviors in the gameplay itself. And players really did notice, which I was really excited by. Personally, one of my favorite quotes that we found on our social media was that I already loved the cherubfish, but I knew that they were my favorite when I read the fact. And that all comes together through the theming, through the takeaways, and then through the implementation in the games. So, on that note, we'll jump into engagement. So, engagement is basically taking all of this research that you're doing and using it to actually connect with your audience. This is where you turn all the behind-the-scenes work and consistent delivery into meaningful points that your players can connect with. It's something we've got a lot of value out of Runaway, and that's largely thanks to our community manager, Lisa, who you may have seen earlier. Basically what I'm saying is people connect with what they recognize, so now's the time where you show off those connection points that you've built in yourself. You can either do that within your game by creating journals or various other points where people can see it, or you can do it really blatantly on social media. At Runaway, we do both. I'll give you an example of one of our social posts. Just to address how powerful this can be, we started posting images of real butterflies just to show players that we were consistently putting real patterns into the game. What was cool about this is that it led to people starting to tell us about times that they were seeing butterflies out in their everyday life. From there, they eventually started to trust us to the point where whenever they would see a butterfly species, they would start asking us to ID it. This effectively means that people weren't just thinking of our games while they were playing them, they're thinking of your games anytime they have a personal connection in the real world. And that's powerful. It also means that you get some really great unexpected connections. In Starlight, we had a situation where we got a whole new goth audience on Twitter. Just because... well, we got a new audience because we were including some of these mystical elements, accurate moon phases, and such like that. It added depth. It connected with a new audience base, which brought that all back into the game itself. The key point here is that the real world is really relatable to everyone, and you might turn up unexpected demographics. My last tip today is don't be afraid to geek out. Match your players' enthusiasm and give them places to talk about it. People want to know you care. They also want to show that they know stuff. So give them places to do it. Something that's worked really, really well for us lately has been live streams, where I kid you not, we end up just sitting around geeking out with our fans about both the stuff we found interesting, our inspirations, as well as thematic references that we've succeeded and failed to get into the games. That's been really exciting and really fun, and these are just a few of the examples that you see up there. And the artists have been some of the best live streams to date, where people get really into seeing them draw in live stream time. It's really cool. It's fun, it creates deeper connection with our players, and it's just great. So, I'm just about out of time. So, I'm going to summarize for you in 6 quick tips for getting the most out of your research, and that's to start early, let your content lead, collect and share what you find, both with your teams, but also with your players, create clear themes and takeaways, build trust by being consistent, connect with players outside the game through relatable content, and don't forget to geek out. In conclusion, be inspired, be meaningful, bring it to your audience. Thank you so much for coming. I look forward to chatting with you guys all later.